There's a madness in me, and that madness sets me free. Understand that madness, that pain, that struggle is the very thing that gets you to the other side and brings you to the light. In today's video, I'm going to try to get you to understand why some people say I'm not human. And it's not the people you think. This claim is made by the bold, controversial meta theory AfroPessimism, and it's just one in a long list of similar bold claims and interpretations about blackness. If you've been here a while, you probably vaguely remember me discussing AfroPessimism in an old video where I talk about the GOP CRT craze, which I called the Black Scare. I don't know if anyone's called it the Black Scare before, but if no one has, I would like to take full responsibility. In that video, that is now only available on Patreon, I discussed AfroPessimism, but only briefly, and I feel like it deserves a lot more time and care to explain, which is exactly what we're going to do today. With the help of our sponsor, me, and my Patreons. All of you are amazing, and I love you for sticking with me all through thick and thin. That $50 a month really helps, like, it's crazy. But if you, new viewer or returning viewer, who has disposable income, want to support my Patreon and help it be more than $50 a month, then you can subscribe for only $2 a month. You get early access to videos, access to my old content under my old name, Ransom Minority. I mean, you literally get to see how it started versus how it's going, like the internet thing, and behind the scenes content. You also receive my parasocial friendship and love. Whenever I have a new Patreon, it honestly makes my day. It's a bit less financial strain, and it also inspires me to create more and become a better resource of information for anyone who stumbles across my content. My goal with my videos are like, if some professor happens to give you a fucking paper on one of the topics I discuss, you can use my video as like a major source. That is the goal of this channel. So if you want to make my day today, subscribe to the Patreon for $2 a month. Or if you're not a fan of subscriptions, trust me, I get it. You got Netflix, Apple, Hulu, HBO Max, Pornhub. I get it. They put me in the negative at my last $5. Then you can check out my Buy Me a Coffee, where you can make a one-time donation, which also makes my day. The last Buy Me a Coffee donation I got was like $100, and it pulled me out the negative, so shout out to that guy. Every time I get a donation, whether it's $100 or $10, it helps a lot. Buy Me a Coffee supporters, Patreons, you guys are the ones who keep me above water at times. Or you can just subscribe to the channel, which is also very appreciated. With that being said, let's get into AfroPessimism. If there's one thing I'll bet my life on, it's that the sun will rise again, and that if anti-Blackness is gone from the world, so is America. If she has 1 million fans, America is one of them. If she has 10 fans, America is one of them. If she has 0 fans, it's because America is dead. Why is America so fucking racist? Well, I have a bunch of videos on that, but today's video is a bit more precise yet broad at the same time. Instead of asking why is America so fucking racist, we're going to ask why is the world so anti-black, and if that anti-blackness is even comparable with other isms. Now, before you click away seething, Oppression Olympics, he's doing the Oppression Olympics. I want to ask you to engage this video with the mindset that your political ideology may have a blind spot that could be filled today, or begin to be filled, and stuff. Pegged. Fuck. Whether it be feminism, Marxism, whatever, I can assure you anti-blackness has contaminated it. This contamination is analyzed by today's topic, AfroPessimism. AfroPessimism is a bold theory that a lot of black academic and scholars praise, but also many disagree with. Interestingly, I get the sense that these disagreements are for different reasons. While I do find some claims made by AfroPessimism to be a bit bold and arguably bleak, I also think it's worth checking out for anyone who wants to expand their analysis when it comes to blackness. So today we'll discuss AfroPessimism and its rival, Black optimism. And by the end of the video, I hope I've given you a different perspective or taught you something new, or, you know, maybe give you something fun you can share at parties. So, what exactly do AfroPessimists believe? Well, part 1, the black is not a human. That could be a very unfortunate crop one day. So before anyone gets too heated, this claim isn't literal, obviously. When this is said, it's an accusation to the world around a black being. That the world, instead of treating black people as, well, people, treats them as objects and nothings. I'm gonna sound crazy for this, but for this section I had to study nothing, and it was really intriguing. Who would have thought nothing could be so interesting? There's many philosophers who discuss nothing. There's Friedrich Schelling, Martin Heidegger, Paul Satter, probably a lot of others that take more than a minor in philosophy to understand. This nothingness claim is what caught my attention the most when delving into AfroPessimism, because the relationship to blackness and nothingness is more intriguing than I first thought. We can start our discussion by asking, what does it mean to be nothing? Du Bois phrased it as, what does it mean to be a problem? Or as Jared Sexton puts it, what is the nature of a form of being that presents a problem for the thought of being itself? More precisely, what is the nature of a human being whose human being is put into question radically and by definition? A human being whose being human raises the question of being human at all. Realize. Or, rather, whose being is a generative force, historic occasion, an essential byproduct of the question of human being in general. How might it be thought that there exists a being about which the question of its particular being is a condition of possibility and the condition of impossibility for any thought about being whatsoever? What can be said about such a being, and how, if at stake in the question is the very possibility of human being, and perhaps even possibility as such, what is the being of a problem? Okay, so first off, the argument by Afro-pessimists that blackness is nothingness requires a separation between African and black. In today's discussion, these are not interchangeable. Blackness does not come from Africa. Rather, Africa and its diaspora become black during a particular stage in their history. Blackness is an adjunct to racial slavery that cannot be conceptualized apart from the epochal changes in travel, trade, labor, consumption, industry, technology, taxation, warfare, finance, insurance, government, bureaucracy, communication, science, religion, and philosophy that were together made possible by the European system of colonial slavery. Sources in the description, by the way. As always, you should subscribe while you're down there. Put in more simple terms, African existence is an identity, and black being, according to Afro-pessimists, is a structural position or instrumentality. Calvin Warren, author of Ontological Terror, says the distinction between African existence and black being is a site of onticide, or a murderous ontology. He suggests that black being is the execration of being, because it emerges through the death sentence of African existence. He thinks that Afro-pessimism, when it speaks of black suffering as unbearable, that it's basically Afro-pessimists asserting that blackness is a function and articulating that blackness exists as pure function, utility, and nothing more. The basic idea that Warren pushes across in Ontological Terror is that blackness bears the nothing of the world, and anti-blackness is hatred of this nothing that challenges the grounds of existence simply by existing. Warner thinks the essence of black suffering is this status, or rather non-status of being, a non-being, a non-human, to be the annoyance of legitimate beings. And it seems to track when looking at Wilderson's Afro-pessimist text. The black is a sentient being, though not a human being. So Afro-pessimists believe that blackness is functionality. What exactly is this function? Well, one function is to bear the nothing, and the other function is to be the other to be measured by. Let me explain. We'll be looking very lightly at Heidegger for this section, lightly because I only have a minor in philosophy. One may think a race-first analysis has no place in philosophical discussions, but they're actually quite compatible. This analysis in particular calls attention to the ontological functions of anti-blackness that fall outside the logic of capitalism. Though this shouldn't be interpreted as a dismissal of capitalism's racial component that many like to ignore. The basic argument about blackness being functionality by Afro-pessimists centers around enslavement. When enslaved, we were commodity as extensions of the legitimate beings, not awarded the privileges of being or citizenship. Instruments, tools, equipment are interchangeable and replaceable. Very different than a human being, functionally. When Warren suggests that black being is pure function or utility, he means the way this being is used as a site of projection for human desires, fantasies, and ontological narcissism. This use or function exceeds involuntary labor and economic interests. I mean, you can find anti-black violence being committed with no economic benefit. And this is the anti-black discourse that philosophy and many other liberation theories have neglected. So there's this philosopher called Heidegger. Philosophy students, I'm doing my best, do not jump down my throat. Heidegger wrote about nothing, but also humanity and what it means to be human, I guess. And one popular concept he had was Dasein. Heidegger describes Dasein as the ability for the human to choose its own path in life and not be determined by external forces. And if we follow that logic, then the black being is not a human, but a different entity. When we assert that black being is not of the world, is to suggest that black being lives not just outside of itself, but outside of any structure of meaning that makes such existence valuable. This is kind of what Warren means when he talks about the execration of being, how black people don't have the legitimacy to interact with the world as true human beings. So there's a few ways this execration can look like, and something I think illustrates the dynamic is other groups' attempts at being white and eagerness to be considered not black. This rejection of the other, this execration of black being, is often used as leverage to gain citizenship, or as close to it one can get. Citizenship here, though, is interchangeable with white. Joel Olson, author of Abolition of White Democracy, one of the many books I read for this topic, argues white chauvinism did not contrast citizenship, but was constitutive of it. As American workers fought to define themselves as producers and citizens, many of them also fought to define themselves as white. You see, admission to the all-white party wasn't just assumed, no. It had to be earned. Take the Irish, for example. The Irish tried to assimilate by allying themselves with the Democratic Party and joining the police force and fighting to join labor organizations. But in typical American fashion, they had to pay the racist piper for entrance into the white club. And this implied a commitment to the degradation of African Americans, which some happily took up. You see, the way America is set up, to be considered white obviously has its perks, so this led to the Irish seeking whiteness. To be acknowledged as white, it was not enough for the Irish to have competitive advantage over Afro-Americans. In order for them to avoid the taint of blackness, it was necessary that no Negroes be allowed to work in occupations where Italians were found. Still better was to erase the memory that Afro-Americans had ever done those jobs. Charles H. Wesley describes their reasoning. While the foreigners were willing to take the menial places which Negroes had been filling, they were unwilling, as a rule, in the North as well as in the South, to work at the same occupations with Negroes. Through the operation of this racial attitude, the Negroes were excluded very gradually from many occupations. They were also at the forefront of many anti-black riots that happened in the North, contained and repressed black neighborhoods through policing, and kept black people away from polls and places they were allowed to vote. And many Irish workers openly supported slavery. They were basically like, see, we're racist too. Let us be white. It was so important to be a citizen in the Jacksonian era because it was important to be white. Once conjoined, the two identities were pretty much interchangeable. Another good example of this is in the book The White Scramje, which describes how white workers in East Texas from the Civil War to World War II tried to force Mexican workers into a racially subordinate status. Mexicans resisted these efforts by fighting against the racial discrimination, but also fighting to prove themselves as white, which they did largely by distinguishing themselves from African Americans. Their attempts at becoming white failed, but over time, Mexicans came to locate themselves in the ethno-racial middle ground between Anglo-Americans and African Americans. Not white enough to claim equality with Anglos, and yet, in many cases, white enough to escape the worst features of the Jim Crow South. Although Mexicans and Anglos lived in a segregated society that strongly discouraged social interaction, the line of separation was not as rigidly maintained between the two groups as it was between whites and blacks. Caught between the compacted walls of privilege and subordination, Mexican workers both resisted discrimination and tried to prove themselves as white, the latter of which involved tactics such as denying their African and indigenous roots. Oh, like Dominican, let me chill. And get this shit, and also protesting their exclusion from lynch mobs. But the relationship between the white citizen and the Negro is really what clarifies this non-human point. When we ask, how's it going with black being? What is the answer? We can safely say no progressive legislation or political movements have been able to transform black beings into recognized ontologies. Refer to social movement asking for people to acknowledge black life is valuable and deserves to life. When I ask how's it going with black being, it's calling attention to the issues that society has had bringing the black being into, well, legitimacy of being. Take the Negro question and the South, for example. The answer to the Negro question, then, is that the ritualistic and repetitive murder of flesh, the primordial relation, is absolutely necessary and indispensable in an anti-black world. As long as the world exists, this murder must continue. The Negro question is like philosophical as fuck, actually, because it inquires into whether the black being can transform into a human being. The difference between the two is the condition of the slave is one of property, the condition of invention and perverse utility. This is what was intended for black being, that it would serve as pure function and utility and property. which is why we need to add the word free to black. The word free implies more than a legal designation. It is an inquiry into the metaphysical structure itself. The debates around black citizenship, freedom, and slavery in the 19th century are also philosophical as fuck. I mean, the question of being is at the heart of these questions. Antebellum politics circulates around the problem of black being, the ontological terror that black being is forced to bear in an anti-black world, and is also the structure of anti-blackness designed to discipline and obliterate black beings. To say that the antebellum American citizen was white is not an empirical observation. Rather, it is an acknowledgement of the successful political struggle in which certain persons won the right to proclaim themselves as white, and therefore citizens, largely by distinguishing themselves from slaves and free black persons. The antithesis of the white citizen, black people in the Jacksonian era were not simply non-citizens, but anti-citizens. They were not merely excluded from the social contract. They were the other that simultaneously threatened and consolidated it. This can be illustrated by who won the vote in the 1820s and 1830s. The right to vote was extended to all white men while it was stripped away from black men. New York in 1821 and Pennsylvania in 1838, for example, eliminated the property requirements for voting and forbid black male voting in the same stroke. By 1860, only 6% of the northern black population lived in states they could vote, and only half were able to vote due to white terror at the polls. In addition, black northerners were excluded from schools, militias, juries, seats of public transportation, participation in social activities, and the possession of firearms. In some places, they were even prohibited from walking on the sidewalk. These changes did a lot more than exclude some and include some, but they produced a white citizen. White citizenship represents the democratization of social status, extending it from the upper class to the masses by transforming it from a perk of wealth to a perk of race, implying that citizenship as standing links democracy to race. Standing not only reconciles equality and freedom with slavery, it builds white domination into the system. Thus, the democratic problem is not simply the legacy of slavery and racial exclusion or the failure of American democratic practices to live up to the American democratic ideals. The democratic problem lies in the white citizen itself. Work. The violence that we associate, or at least we claim to associate with the unjust and inhumane, the whip, the canine patrol, exclusionary procedures, disenfranchisement, anti-literacy laws, the routine humiliation and invasion, are ways a metaphysical organization of existence contends with black being as nothing, as anti-human, and as anti-citizen. This can be seen in antebellum politics, but also in our current political system. The metaphysical infrastructure already presumes certain pure ontological positions that define who is a legitimate being and who is a non-being, and these positions enable the unjust and inhumane. Non-being is a necessary invention because it bears the nothing, like I said. But this being is also hated because it is a reminder that the human being, the legitimate being, is a metaphysical fiction. It is this tension between necessity and hatred that ontological terror turns into forms of physical and emotional and psychic terror. Returning to our earlier claim that the black being is a sentient being and not a human being, what sets the black apart from the human? And I think Wilderson says it the best. It is the division between social death and social life, a division between structural violence of, for example, capitalism, post-colonialism, and patriarchy, and the structural violence of social death. This is not about playing oppression Olympics as some would have it. It is about making critical assessments of what have therefore been insufficiently compared analysis of multiracial wretched of the earth. Specifically, what has been missing is sufficient comparison between the gracious violence of social death and the contingent violence of colonial, class, and gendered subjugation. A comparative analysis of the dead and the living. Would you lighten up, kids?
I changed my hair. Let me know if you like it. Unless you don't, then keep it to yourself. So there's some more differences between the human we gotta cover for you to get the real vibes of AfroPessimism. Let's talk about violence more. We love violence. AfroPessimism links violence committed to non-black groups or humans with transgressions. This is where AP sees a disconnect from liberation theories that try to understand black suffering. AfroPessimism, then, is less a theory and more a meta-theory, a critical project that, by deploying blackness as a lens of interpretation, interrogates the unspoken assumptive logic of Marxism, post-colonialism, psychoanalysis, and feminism through rigorous theoretical consideration of their properties and assumptive logic. And it does so again on a higher level of abstraction than in discourses and methods of theories it interrogates. Again, Afro-pessimism is, in the main, more of a meta-theory than a theory. It is pessimistic about the claims theories of liberation make when these theories try to explain black suffering, or when they try to analogize black suffering with the suffering of other oppressed beings. In this cool meta theory, it's argued that violence for these groups has a history of violence being used to put them in the places they are now within the system. Once they're in the places, the violence is pulled back, coming back when said group challenges their position. Let's take the worker and the capitalist. The worker says, "Fuck you, pay me," and the capitalist says, "Die." The difference between the violence of these groups and black people is that AfroPessimists believe this violence never went into remission for slaves. It critiques Marxist analysis with slavery because it sees that arguments around slavery that focus mainly on production are insufficient. What the Marxists do with slavery is they try to show how violence is connected to production. And that means they are not really thinking about the violence of slavery comprehensively. The violence of social death is actually subtended to the production of the psychic health of all those who are not slaves, something that cannot be literally commodified or weighed on an actual balance sheet. It is complex, but it is simple too. Blacks are not going to be genocided like Native Americans. We are being genocided, but genocided and regenerated, because the spectacle of black death is essential to the mental health of the world. We can't be wiped out completely because our deaths must be repeated visually. I know I'm human because I am not black. I know I'm not black because when and if I experience the violence that blacks experience, there is a reason, some contingent transgression. This is why online posts of police murdering black people contribute more to the psychic well-being of non-black people, to their communal pleasures and sense of ontological presence, than they contribute to the deterrence, arrests, or even general sensitivity to black pain and suffering. Wilderson goes on to say that not only does there seem to be no end in sight for this violence, but that no cartography of violence can be mapped, for that would imply the prospect for a map of nonviolent space, the possibility of black sanctuary, which is, by definition, an oxymoron. Orlando Patterson, author of Slavery and Social Death, argues the ultimate distinction between a human and a slave is their relationship with violence. Orlando Patterson isn't an Afro-pessimist, but Wilderson did use a lot of Orlando Patterson's work for his Afro-pessimist meta theory. But Orlando Patterson argues the ultimate distinction between a slave relationship with violence is the violence of social death. Violence against the working class secures an economic order. Violence against non-black women secures patriarchal order. Violence against Native Americans secures colonial order. But he sees the violence of anti-Blackness as securing the order of life itself. The worker who was fired remains a worker to be hired elsewhere. The slave who was freed was no longer a slave. Thus, it was necessary to continually repeat the original violent act of transforming a free person into slave. This act of violence constitutes the prehistory of all stratified societies, but it determines both the prehistory and concurrent history of slavery. And this means in Afro-pessimist analysis that blackness cannot be separated from slavery. And it gets even more pessimistic as you go on throughout the work. He goes on to argue how the paradigm other groups use to narrate their relationships to their oppression isn't available to black people. Whereas historical time marks stasis and change within a paradigm, it does not mark the time of the paradigm, the time of time itself, the time by which the slave's dramatic clock is set. For the slave, historical time is no more viable a temporality of emancipation than biographical time, the time of empathy. To put it differently, for black people there is no time and space of consent, no relative respite from force and coercion. Violence spreads its tendrils across the body, chokes the community, and expands, intensifies, and mutates into new and ever more grotesque forms in the collective unconscious through literature and film. Working class ideas are contaminants, threats to the capitalist economy, to the capitalist conception of the world. Black bodies are a different kind of contaminant. They are threats to the human body ideal and to the psychic coherence of human life. This schema is even different from the ones that attends Native American genocide. The Native American was and is genocided for land. There are pre-logical or libidinal elements to the murder of 18 million people, to be sure. But land acquisition and absorption gives the genocide a kind of coherence and reasonableness, similar to the massacre of workers who have gone on strike, who have withdrawn their consent. You can't make an analogy between the violence immigrants, Native Americans, and workers are subject to, and the violence that attends black people. It is absolutely necessary for blacks to be castrated, raped, genitally mutilated and violated, beaten, shot, and maimed. And it is necessary for this to take place in the streets, as well as in popular culture as on TV and cinema. Blacks can even be genocided, but only up to a point, because unlike Indians, blacks are not in the possession of something exterior to themselves as civil society wants. Civil society does not want black land as it wants Indian land. It does not want black consent as it wants working class consent. What civil society wants from black people is far more essential, far more fundamental than land or profits. What civil society needs from black people is confirmation of human existence. Of course, the human being can say, I know I am alive at the level of identity because I speak Spanish or French or English, because I am straight or gay, because I am rich or middle class. This is a kind of life at the level of identity, or culture, or sexual orientation. But to be able to say I am alive at a paradigmatic level, that I really am truly a human being and not the other thing, this can only be guaranteed to the extent to which one can say I am not black. AfroPessimism helps us understand why anti-black violence isn't eliminated when it is exposed on camera. They believe for this to happen, the mind would have to see a person with heritage, rights, and claims being violated. And this is not the way black people function in the collective unconscious. And emancipation did nothing but agitate the grounds of black existence, and free black people were only so in name. The free black presents to antebellum culture a particular terror for the legitimate being. A contributor to the African repository urges readers to contend with this terror in order to estimate correctly the magnitude of the evil which will come upon us. Unless we can take steps in time to arrest the danger, we only consider the paid increase of the black population in the United States since 1800. We should not shut our eyes to the danger until it comes upon us in all its fearfulness. It is our duty then to commence an early and energetic and systematic movement to prevent this danger. It is evident that we must devise some scheme to get clear of the free black population, which is becoming an incubus upon all the states. Tennessee at this time has not a very large black population, and we can, if we will commence in time, get rid of them, but at little expense. But what is it about the free black that makes this antebellum writer and our current world so anxious? What about black presence is so threatening? It's that freedom and blackness are incompatible concepts for many antebellum thinkers. In particular, blacks are incapable of bearing that freedom. Freedom is too much of a responsibility for black people, according to the antebellum thinkers. The contributor implies is that the transformation of ontological instrument to human is a destructive enterprise, since it defines the function of the black being in modernity. It is but one global example of the obsession of destroying this nothing, manifested as the black Negro. Violence against the black being is unwarranted, precisely because an anti-black world will continuously and relentlessly attempt to eliminate the nothing that is the evil black Negro. The gratuity of violence in all its manifestations is an ontological problem. The antagonist of the worker is a capitalist. The antagonist of the native is a settler. But the antagonist of the black is a human being. Wilderson thinks this violence even makes narrative a concept that is unrealistic for the black being. That's right, he called narrative anti-black. Wilderson thinks that the belief that all sentient beings can be protagonists within a political or personal narrative, that every sentient being arrives with a history, is foundational to the cognitive maps of radical politics. And this belief is underwritten by the idea that all sentient beings can be redeemed. But he believes without the presence of a being who is barred from redemption, emancipation is not redemption, a being that is generally dishonored, natively alienated, and open to naked violence, history and narrative will lack their touchstones of cohesion. These qualities, general dishonor, native alienation, and being open to naked violence, are those what Orlando Patterson calls social death. Since the violence of slavery is the violence of social death, Wilderson believes that this makes it contradictory to put in a narrative. AfroPessimism is a theoretical lens that clarifies the irreconcilable differences between, on one hand, the violence of capitalism, gender oppression, and white supremacy, and, on the other hand, the violence of anti-blackness. The antagonism between the post-colonial subject and the settler cannot and should not be analogized with the violence of social death. That is the violence of slavery, which did not end in 1865. Slavery is a relational dynamic, not an event and certainly not a place in space like the South, just as colonialism is a relational dynamic, and that relational dynamic can continue to exist once the settler has left or ceded governmental power. These two relations are secured by radically different structures of violence. AfroPessimism offers an analytic lens that labors as a corrective to humanist assumptive logic. It provides a theoretical apparatus that allows black people to not have to be burdened by the rules of analogy, because analogy mystifies rather than clarifies black suffering. Analogy mystifies black people's relationship to other people of color. AfroPessimism throws this mystification into relief without fear of faults and fissures that are revealed in the process. Human life is dependent on black death for its existence and for its conceptual coherence. There is no world without blacks, yet there are no blacks in the world. The black is indeed a sentient being, but the hobble of humanist thought is a constitutive disavowal of blackness and social death, a disavowal that theorizes the black as a degraded human entity. The black is not a sentient being whose narrative progression has been circumscribed by racism, colonialism, or even slavery for that matter. Blackness and slaveness are inextricably bound in such a way that slaveness cannot be separated from blackness. Blackness cannot exist other than slaveness. If we look closely, we can also see that gender itself cannot be reconciled with the slave's genealogical isolation. I mean, yes, the patriarchy, but you find me one white woman who wanted to be treated as a black woman well, actually at any point of history. Essential antagonism, therefore, is not between the workers and the bosses, not between the settler and the native, not between the queer and the straight, but between the living and the dead. Get it? Great. Except we're not quite done. So there's a third tier of terror that Wilderson likes to talk. Well, there's 3 tiers of terror Wilderson brings up, but he's mostly focusing on the third tier here. So the 3 forms of terror Wilderson points out are the terror of the political society, the police, the army, the prison industrial complex. Second is civil society's hegemonic blocks and its institutions, like the mainstream media, the university, or the megachurch. And third is the terror of counter-hegemonic and revolutionary thought, the logic of white feminism, working class struggles, the logic of multicultural coalitions, the logic of immigrant rights, stuff like that. Wilderson doesn't think this disconnect is incidental either, nor does he think it can be overcome through dialogue. He gives a story about a multicultural coalition. Oh my god, the story is really, really funny. Fuck it. You're already here. We're gonna tell the story. So Wilderson goes to this conference thing or whatever, and they have this exercise where they put all the people of color to different groups based on color. So yellow corresponding with the Asians, red corresponding, you get it. And this was an exercise to bring attention to how society just kind of pigeonholes everybody and takes away that diversity and differences and whatnot. This turned into a clusterfuck. A lot of people are like, we don't want to be called yellow or red or whatever. It's putting us in one little thing. And the people who were doing it rave were like, yeah, that's the fucking point. The black people were fine, but people who were mixed black people said that they didn't think they deserved to be in the black category because they felt like their experiences were more complex than that, and they felt like they needed a different category. So the mixed black people didn't want to be considered black, which eventually they realized was silly, and they ended up joining the black group. But the whole experience for Wilderson was just kind of enlightening about how other groups think about their oppression versus how black people think of theirs. He says this third tier terrorizes through an interdiction against black performance, but also a demand for black performance. Civil society has and continues to expand and contrast to accommodate or diminish multiple positions and identities. History shows us the 19th century transitions from territories to states being characterized by a conflicting diversity of views with respect to all of these groups, sometimes even debating the civic and social membership of Native Americans. But civil society would not know the boundary of such debates if not for the presence of black folks. Black people hold that line for white people and for everyone else. Because no matter how bad things get, at least you're not black, according to AfroPessimists. Black suffering is not a function of the performances of civil society, but of the existence of civil society. For the black, civil society is a murderous projection. In short, whereas such coalitions and social movements cannot be called outright handmaidens of anti-Blackness, their rhetorical structures, political desire, and their emancipatory horizon are blustered by a life-affirming anti-Blackness, the death of black desire. So, we made all these claims and observations and asserted all the things and read all the theories, but what do? The answer may shock you. Well, Warren thinks the answer is to reject humanity. We've tried everything from marches to masochistic citizenship to exceptional citizenship and respectability to protest and armed conflict. In the end, either we will continue this degrading quest for human rights and incorporation, or we will take a leap of faith and reject the terms through which we organize our existence. By abandoning the humanness, and the liberal humanism that enshrouds it, we can better understand the violent formations of anti-Blackness, particularly ontological terror. To abandon a human does not mean that one accepts the terms of inferiority. We do not have to abandon within the axiological framework of humanism. We can reject that framework as well. In other words, we've invested unbelievable value in the human. It constitutes the highest value in the world, and for this reason, We are terrified of letting go of it because we believe this value will protect us against anti-Blackness. As long as we continue to invest in a value structure that renders the human the highest and most important being within a world, we will continue to plead for recognition and acceptance. It is this terror of value, of not possessing this value, that keeps us wedded to the idea of the human. This entanglement of value and ontology produces tremendous misery and disappointment for Blackness. As Ronaldo Walcott states, what it means to be a human is continually defined against Blacks. The very basic terms of social human engagement are shaped by anti-Black logics, so deeply embedded in various normatives that they resist intelligibility as modes of thought, and yet we must attempt to think them. Black thinking, then, must think what is impossible to think within the constraints of metaphysics and ontology. Our enterprise broaches the unknown, the place where we can no longer ask questions. Perhaps what I'm suggesting constitutes an ontological revolution, one that would destroy the world and its institutions, the end of the world, as Fanon calls it. But these are our options, since the metaphysical holocaust will continue as long as the world exists. The nihilistic revelation, however, is that such a revolution will destroy all life, far from the freedom dreams of political idealists or the sobriety of the pragmatists. The important task for Black thinking is to imagine Black existence without being, humanism, or the human. Such thinking will lead us into the abyss, but we must face this abyss, its terror and majesty. This end of the world sentiment is shared by Wilderson as well. The way Wilderson describes anti-Blackness in America is like a car with no gas. The US government could become a democracy for people of color who are not Black. It is not likely, but it is entirely possible. But if it ever rid itself of the central ingredient that overdetermines its condition of possibility, that is to say, if the United States of America were to somehow not be anti-Black, we would no longer have a country. The United States of America would cease to exist. No anti-Blackness, no nation. Police brutality has never identified our problem. Our problem is one of complete captivity from birth to death, and coercion as a starting point of our interaction with the state and with ordinary white citizens. They say to us, you, Black person, must demonstrate to me that I am unethical in my actions. Yet they wouldn't hold any other paradigm of oppression to that high of a bar. They wouldn't say that the white French people living in Algeria have to be destroyed because they are unethical in their actions. They would say they have to be destroyed because they are present, because they are here. They wouldn't say, well, you know, there are some good capitalists and some bad capitalists. They would say, the capitalist as a category has to be destroyed. What freaks them out about an analysis of anti-Blackness is that this applies to the category of the human, which means that they have to be destroyed regardless of their performance or of their morality, and that they occupy a place of power that is completely unethical regardless of what they do. And they're not going to do that, because what are they trying to do? They're trying to build a better world. What are we trying to do? We're trying to destroy it. So, that is AfroPessimism. If you made it this far in the video and you're not subscribed, that's okay. Just fix it. Also join my Patreon. Just give it a click. It only takes a few seconds. Black optimism is... So there's two people who came up when I was looking more into Black optimism. Coleman Hughes and Fanon. Each with very different takes and vibes of Black optimism, but both worth discussing. Coleman Hughes is really popular for his debate with Ta-Nehisi Coates on reparations, but he's also done other stuff, like wrote this article on Black optimism that we'll be responding to today. In this article, appropriately titled The Case for Black Optimism, he gives reasons for Black America to be more optimistic about the way things are going. He starts off with incarceration. So while we all know the prison system is shit and modern day slavery in all the cases, Coleman Hughes points out that the incarceration rate for Black men has fell dramatically. Nevertheless, there are reasons to be optimistic. From 2001 to 2017, the incarceration rate for Black men declined by 34%. Even this statistic, however, understates the progress by lumping Black Americans of all ages together. When you look at age-specific incarceration outcomes, you'll find two opposing trends. Older Black Americans are doing slightly worse than previous generations. That's not really optimistic now, is it, Coleman? But younger Black Americans are doing better. To put the speed and size of this trend in perspective, my first day of kindergarten in 2001 and my first legal drink in 2017, the incarceration rate for Black men aged 25 through 29, 20 through 24, and 18 through 19 declined, respectively, by 56%, 60%, and 72%. For young Black women, the story is similar. a 59% drop for those aged 25 to 29, a 43% drop for those aged 20 to 24, and a 69% drop from those aged 18 to 19. Honestly, be a bit narrow look at things. I mean, incarceration isn't the only issue people bring up when we discuss the prison system and, black people's relationship with policing. It's like, yeah, we're getting arrested less, but what am I supposed to take away from that? Hey, less of us are getting arrested since 2001 according to these statistics, so stop protesting. Stop being so hard on the police and justice system. What am I supposed to do with that? Okay, anyway, then he talks about health outcomes. Between 1999 and 2015, the mortality rate for Black Americans aged 65 and over shrank by 29% for cancer, 31% for diabetes, and 43% for heart disease. What's more, all of those percentage drops were larger than those experienced by comparable whites over the same period. But that's pretty cool and a reason to be optimistic about general health outcomes. No complaints I can think of there. Shame they're going to prison at a higher rate. Then he goes into education. Between the 1999 and 2000 and 2016 and 2017 school years, the number of Black students who earned bachelor degrees increased by 82%. Over the same period, the number of associate's and master's degrees awarded to Black students more than doubled. 2018 census data showed that 37% of Black Americans aged 25 to 34 had some kind of college degree. If Black America were its own country, that would place it between Germany and Spain in terms of educational attainment. What's more, the economist Raj Chetty has found that Black women, though less likely to attend college than white women, are now more likely to attend college than white men from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. Great things. I think education is important, even though I have endless beef for academia. Not even in an academic setting, but just in general. Though I do feel like a lot of this generation went to college to keep up with the economy, and because we're kind of sold with that idea that college is a ticket to financial stability when it's not, but still, great things. Then he goes into upward mobility. Along with more education has come more upward mobility. The Federal Reserve recently reported that over 60% of Blacks at every level of educational attainment say they're doing better financially than their parents, a higher percentage than either whites or Hispanics. And although Black men still lag behind white men in terms of upward mobility, Chetty has found that Black women now go on to earn slightly higher incomes than white women from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. I feel this comes with the educational attainment. I mean, it's a piece of paper, but jobs love it. And a lot of us got it. Still got to pay for that piece of paper, and Black women have more student debt than any group, so I don't know how that factors into that, but maybe it's factored in, maybe it's not. They don't say anything about the debt or anything in that paper. They were just talking about earnings, I guess, but I don't know how debt figures into those earnings. I'm not sure if that was accounted for, so I guess I'll give that to you. What do you think? What do y'all think? But that was Coleman Hughes' Black Optimism. So, a few things about Coleman Hughes. I feel like he has a tendency to position himself on the opposing side of Black leftism or any Black radical politics, which is not a here nor there, but I guess I want to ask, what is the ultimate goal of this article mainly? Hey, don't be so pessimistic about that police murdering video or you not being able to get a job or house, because you will have a much less likely chance of getting arrested than you did from 2001, so be optimistic. Anyway, that's Coleman Hughes' Black Optimism. I don't really vibe with his. This is Fred Modden's, which I feel like is much better. Unlike AfroPessimism, Black Optimism rejects the idea, or Fred Modden's idea of Black Optimism, rejects the idea that Black people are socially dead, nothing, subjects, of all that shit. Instead, they think that Blackness existed before these systems of domination. The Black Optimist says, why would I measure my worth or my identity by the systems used that said that I am not a human? The Black Op says, Blackness precedes anti-Blackness and can't be measured by the traditional measure because the traditional measure exposes the Black to this anti-Black gaze. The Black Op says, I am not socially dead if I measure my humanity by my own standard. Society may want me to be a machine, but I'm gonna do me. I'm gonna do my own thing. Maybe by whatever the fuck measure society uses to measure social life, we're socially dead, but why would I measure my social life by the social measure that says that I am socially dead? Maybe by whatever the fuck society's measure of social life is, we're dead, but we're still very much there to see, hear, and impact in our own unique way. In short, Black social life is a stolen life, a criminal operation by those designated as criminal against the social death of slavery and anti-Blackness. It is a theft of being, a form of ontological resistance to anti-Blackness. This fugitive resistance is Black Optimism. This optimism recognizes the parent-ontological difference between black people and blackness, between blackness as a fugitive social life and anti-blackness as social death. Optimism is a matter of imagination, the ability to craft a narrative that sustains hope, the capacity to imagine things otherwise. So, Afro-pessimism and black optimism, who's right? I don't know. I lean more towards optimism functionally, I guess, but the Afro-pessimist argument is compelling. I think Wilderson is correct on a lot of fronts, but he didn't have to be such a downer about it. Afro-pessimism, more like Afro-doomerism, but I also really resonate with the stolen social life and fugitive language of black optimism. I shall now call myself a Afro-realist, a term I have just made up and coined that represents the in-between point of Afro-pessimism and black optimism. Yes, it is a real thing, I just made it up. I think Wilderson's analysis gives us the lens to find more substantial answers to past and future issues and maybe work out some issues with liberation theories that still struggle with anti-blackness, but I don't fucking know. I'm just a guy with a camera. What do you think you are, a black optimist or Afro-pessimist? Tell me in the form of a Patreon subscription. That's the video, and I will see you when I see you. If like 400 people subscribe to the $2 Patreon, it still wouldn't even be rent. That's crazy. This economy is wild.